still is a very important method of research and social work. So we will start with the first unit where we will discuss the introduction part of social work methods. Um, Now, we've already seen that ultimately social work research entails to improve the social functioning of individuals, groups, and communities. And as a method of social work, it is very important that social work research continues to take place, and the whatever um, inferences or whatever new things, the knowledge that's created out of the research, it can be used to enrich the practice of social work and improve the effectiveness of social work methods. Now, here the first type is what is known as a single subject design research. Now, single subject design research are basically a type of quasi experimental research. Now, these are basically a type of experimental research, but not fully experimental research. These are termed as quasi-experimental research, and these uses time series analysis technique of social research to the evaluation of the impact of interventions on individual cases, group, family, and community. So this is again a type of research where a lot of emphasis is on um, basically how do you use it in the practical sense. How can you use it to improvise the methods of social work research? And such designs, they involve repeated measure of the dependent variable. Now we know that there are two sets of variables. Variables means the facts that we intend to find out. One is what is known as the dependent variable, and the other is known as the independent variable. Now, dependent variable is the one which is dependent on some external conditions, okay? And this is exactly what we intend to find out. So that's the dependent variable, and another variable is known as the independent variable, which remains constant. So these designs, these involve repeated measure of the dependent variables. So whichever variable we intend to find out, the value of which we intend to find out, or the relationship of that variable with other variable, we tend to have repeated measurements of these dependent variables before and after a particular intervention. So first, we will, yesterday also when we were discussing about the design, we have talked about pre-test intervention and the post-test, the post-intervention data that we obtain. So this is again something which we will find out. So we will take repeated measures of these dependent variables before we actually apply an intervention. And once we apply an intervention, after taking the measurement, we will apply the intervention. And after that intervention, we will again see and measure the data to see if there is any sustained pattern of changes in the dependent variable. Okay. So this is basically again, it's again a more applied research, which is done very frequently in social work settings, specifically those which include these methods of casework and group work. Now, here the unit of analysis in this design is one irrespective of whether the unit of analysis of one individual, family, community, or organization. Okay. And as such, one of the major limitation is again we have already seen is the external validity. Again, we know that since it's a dependent variable means that it is very much change. It is likely to change with changes in the external conditions. So we have to make sure that whatever dependent variable we want to measure, it is done in a controlled environmental setting. But we should not forget that, of course, single subject experiments, they can identify with a high degree of internal validity in those interventions that seem to work in one perhaps idiosyncratic context. Now, see, we've already seen that usually quasi-experimental researches and experimental researches, they are best worked when we are talking about laboratory researches. That goes very much even for psychiatric settings or psychological studies, including the psychiatric social work settings. But mostly quasi-experimental designs can still be done because here we are not totally dependent upon lot many external conditionalities. So again, that is why it is termed as a quasi-experimental research. Now these studies, they include larger scale experiments utilizing control groups, or they might be additional single subject experiments that attempt to approximate replications of the original single subject experiment in other contexts. Now, we have already seen that these may include larger scale experiments, and of course, we would also need control groups here. So there will be one group which will be a control group, okay, where the intervention has not been applied, okay, and the other one will be the group where we intend to see the changes, okay. That is a dependent variable, and the one thing is that these designs are actually very effective when we are dealing with the families, working with families, with communities, and we want to check the effectiveness of intervention. We can always compare and contrast the conditions or the changes that have taken place previous to our intervention or uh, uh, after the intervention. So again, it's a very important research design for social work. Now, now they have actually given a little bit of more detail about quasi-experimental designs, and they have talked about the background that prior to single subject designs, like what we were talking about, social researchers, they had no other alternative than to go for conventional experimental research designs. So they used to actually do comparison of experimental group with the control group. Now this is something which we again use very frequently in psychological researches in psychology as well as in physical sciences. But generally, these become very difficult to conduct in practical settings, especially when we are dealing with social subjects. These becomes very difficult because then we know that at times the environmental conditions can be very difficult to control, and they also become quite time consuming and expensive, where you have to identify clients who are facing similar problems, or randomly assign some to treatment and others to control groups. So again, these studies, they become very time consuming, that is, it take a lot of time to do, and also they become quite expensive, and it becomes very difficult to identify clients with similar problems and similar backgrounds. So this design may not be very useful for most of the studies that are now taking place in social work. But nevertheless, since it started with this kind of research design, this continued to be quite popular for quite some time. Now, the baseline phase is basically they are based on the principle of the time series data analysis. Okay, that is, it requires the measurements of the dependent variable at successive intervals of time. So you are going to take up the independent variables, and you need to measure the various aspects of that dependent variable at successive intervals of time. Okay, so these measurement points before the intervention, these are known as the baseline phase. So this is the phase where nothing has changed. There has been no intervention whatsoever. So that means that this will give you a very clear picture of the condition of the dependent variable once we this is before the application of the intervention. Now, how is the research process takes place? Now, these single subject designs have many similarities with scientific practice. Okay, they also bring in a lot of objectivity and empiricism into the practice, because we have already seen that generally this is very much seen in most of the experimental designs and quasi-experimental designs, that they have a lot of objectivity and empiricity. So these can be very objective, and these, by following these research designs, social researchers, they become very much come in a position to know precisely what intervention was applied and what effect was produced, and of course they have the supporting data and other proofs to support their results. And these designs, they link research and practice by putting the practitioner in a very good position. Okay, so definitely it gives you a very good idea about how effective that intervention was. So this is how you are the various problems, the various steps that is taken in a single subject design research process. You start with problem formulation. Okay, so you formulate exactly what the problem is. You identify the objectives. Okay, so here you will identify the objectives based upon the problem that we have identified. After the objectives are set, we are going to select the single subject design. Okay, that is the quasi experimental research design. After that will come the pre-intervention assessment stage, which means that we will study the baseline data, that or the condition before the intervention. Next step would be to apply the intervention strategies. Whatever intervention strategies we have planned according to the problems, we are going to apply these interventions. And once these interventions have been applied successfully to the field, we are going to assess the effect of intervention, and based on the data we are going to draw conclusions after comparing the data in the pre-intervention assessment as well as the post-intervention assessment. Okay, I hope this is clear. Again, as is clear that we do not go for a hypothesis formulation in this, we mostly stick with the objectives, the research objectives. Now, there are different types of single subject designs. Now, this is just three alternative subject designs which have been given and which is there for your course. But there are, apart from these, there are a lot of other designs as well. But since it is not a part of the syllabus, we need not go into it. Now, there are basically three alternative single subject designs that has been stated. One is what is known as the AB design, which is the basic single subject design. So, what we have discussed above, this is the basic single subject design. Second is ABAB, also known as a withdrawal or the reversal design. And finally, the ABCD, which is the multiple component design. Okay. Now, the basic single subject design is one of the most simplest single subject design, and also the very popular single subject design because it involves only one baseline phase and one intervention phase as illustrated. So whatever we have discussed above, that is a typical single subject, basic single subject design. Can you please mute yourself? Thank you. So that is the basic single subject design, whatever we have discussed above. After this comes what is known as the withdrawal or the reversal design. Now, this is generally used in order to have better control over the external or the extraneous factors. Okay, and this withdrawal or reversal design has two baseline phases and two intervention phases. So instead of one baseline phase and one intervention phase, we will have two baseline phases and two intervention phase. And in this research design, after the first intervention is over, it is generally withdrawn and the second baseline phase is established. Okay. So once the second baseline is stable, the intervention is again reintroduced. Okay. And after this, of course, this design is based on the logic that if there is any improvement in the target problem, okay, by the first intervention, then we know that the target problem will go back to its original baseline level during the second baseline. And if this intervention is withdrawn and the target problem should improve when intervention is reintroduced. Okay, so this means that once the first intervention is over, after we take up the baseline phase, and we introduce the intervention. After the first intervention is over, the second baseline phase is established. So we again take up the data based on that, and once the second baseline is stable, when that is taken, the second intervention is the intervention that we have planned, that is reintroduced. Okay, so if there is any kind of improvement in the target population, okay, so after we have introduced the first intervention, if there is any kind of an improvement in the target population, then we know that the problem will go back to its original baseline, and baseline level during the second baseline. And if during the second baseline, if the intervention is withdrawn and the target problem is improved, then we know that intervention will be reintroduced. Okay, so this is all about the ABAB withdrawal reversal design after the single phase. Now, this AB design, it can be quite strengthened by moving to a reversal design, because here we are taking up the data twice. Okay, and this ensures that the two versions differ only in the ABA design ends in a no intervention phase, whereas in the ABAB design, the intervention is introduced. So this ABA design and the ABAB design, they are similar to a great extent, except for the ABA, you have two baseline phases and just one intervention phase. And in ABAB, there will be two intervention phase and two baseline phase. Now, this is comparatively quite technical, so I would really appreciate if you take up your books and you read the given chapters immediately after the class, or maybe by tomorrow morning, so that you are able to actually retain whatever has been taught to you. Okay. After the ABAB, we come to what is known as the multiple component design, or the ABCD design. Okay. Now, the multiple component designs, they are generally designed to handle special problems in different situations. Okay, now these designs, they are commonly known as specialized designs. Okay, and here this is symbolized by the term ABCD design, where B stands, B, C, and D. These last three uh, 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 words stand for alternative interventions. Okay, so we will be having alternative interventions or alternative plans, for ABCD, or the multiple component designs. And these designs are basically used to evaluate the impact of changes in the intervention. So, how the changes that we have made in the intervention, how they have impacted and modified the intervention accordingly in order to increase their effectiveness. So we will have multiple intervention here, and we are going to evaluate the impact of changes. Okay, so this design is very much useful to evaluate the impact of changes in the intervention. And we can accordingly modify the intervention from time to time in order to improve its effectiveness. And conversely, also, if the researcher seeks to determine which intervention package is really responsible for the improvement, that can also be done. Okay, so this is again a typical design which uses multiple intervention plans. Now, ABCD, though it is a very effective design, generally it is not used too much for the research purposes, simply because of the fact that it is quite time consuming. It is also quite expensive, because here you have to actually plan different alternatives, and also it becomes very, very complicated also. So it requires a very skilled person or a skilled researcher to actually plan this um, design. Now, after this, we come to the data analysis part. Now, the results of the single subject experiments, okay, they are presented in a graphic form. Of course, whatever data we will gather from these experiments, they will be presented in the graphic form. In analyzing data from the graph, generally we look for patterns and trends of data and the slope of the line graph. Now, this is typically whenever the data analysis tools, now there are a lot of data analysis tools that are now available for the researchers. There are also softwares, as we have already discussed, which can be easily used in order to do the data analysis part. But generally, after we gather the data, we will present the data in different graphic forms, in tables, in graphs, in diagrams, and based on that, we are going to analyze the data. Okay. Now, next comes the test of significance for single subject research designs. Now, there are a lot of statistical procedure for testing the significance of changes that is caused by interventions. There are two procedures. One is known as the two standard deviation method, okay, and the other one is the acceleration line approach method, okay. uh, Now, these are basically most of the standard deviation method. You need not actually go too much into it. Mostly, they require use of appropriate formulas. So, again, standard deviation method is again given to you. You have to basically apply this standard deviation method, the formula for standard deviation method, and then apply to the whatever result that you have uh, uh, whatever result has come from the research. So this is the standard deviation, and the next is the acceleration line approach. Now this is again this test of significance. It is based on the assumption that the data would continue increasing or decreasing at the same rate it was in the baseline phase. Okay. So this is again a type of test of significance which is used when the slope of baseline is clearly showing increasing or decreasing trend of the data. So whichever method of whichever test of significance we are going to use, whether it's going to be a standard deviation or acceleration line approach, it would depend upon the result that we are getting from the data analysis. Now, again, this is again a procedure which requires the computation, stepwise computation, and you have to actually uh, now I actually do it, construct that graph, and then you have to calculate it. So you can just go through the basic steps, although it is not necessary to actually go through it. But the thing is, you for the examinations, you need to have an idea of exactly what these methods are. So you may get a question on that, maybe write a short note on that, on maybe or say standard deviation, maybe acceleration line method. So all these things can be asked in short questions. So they you may be asked to actually generally give a brief description of how it is done. Now, how generalized these single subject designs are. See, the ultimate goal of any scientific research is generalizability, so that you can get inferences which can be generalized. The more generalized inferences are, the more objective the inferences or universal they will be. Their applicability is going to increase. They're going to be more universal. So that is why a greater generalization definitely means a greater amount of scientific vigor and a greater amount of objectivity in the research. Generally, in social science research, generally talking in social science research, we find that uh, these can be generalizable to a considerably large number of situations. Okay, and the cases can only contribute to the knowledge base of the practice. So these can be generally considered for a larger number of situations. Why? Because we are dealing with people in similar situations. So definitely, for persons who are suffering from the same problem, they can be actually, brought under the ambit of these research designs. Interestingly, in single subject designs research, it is if it is proved that the interventions were effective, there is no guarantee that the same intervention would be effective in other clients. Okay, for the same reason as we have talked about, that would depend a lot upon the external environment, since we are dealing with dependent variable. The impact of the extraneous environment is going to have a great impact on the individual. So this limitation of the single subject design research generally is there, but we find that irrespective of this, the social researchers use this method because the generalizability of findings can be achieved through repeating the study by taking more measurements. So the more number of cases you take for carrying out research work for single subject designs, you will find that the more generalized it will become. So, of course, it depends upon the number of cases that we are measuring. After this, we come to the experimental research designs. Now, we have discussed quasi experimental research designs. Now, we will go to experimental research designs. Now, what exactly experimental research designs are? Experimental research is, as the name suggests, these are designed for testing causal relationship. That is, relationship between two or more variables. Okay. A causal relationship, it refers to the relationship between two variables where one variable, okay, x determines another variable y. And for example, if a researcher wishes to test a causal relationship that punishments cause low self-esteem, by comparing a group of students who have been exposed to punishments with one that have not been exposed, he has to measure the two groups with respect to y, either during or after exposure to x. Okay, so here we will take up the relationship, find out relationship between two variables. Okay, find out the relationship that they have with between each other. Now, the logic of causal inference. Now, what exactly is the logic of causal inference? Now, in order to clarify the issue that we have raised above, okay, we need to understand the logic of causal inference. So here the three conditions have to be fulfilled to draw a causal inference. Now, what are these three conditions? One, if the cause precedes the effect in time. Okay. Second is if there is an empirical correlation between them. And third, if the relationship is not found to be a result of the effect of some third variable on each of the two initially observed variables. Okay, so these are the three conditions that have to be fulfilled in order for that case to be a fit case for experimental research design. Now, the first condition in a causal relationship is that the cause precedes the effect in time. Okay. So, for example, they have given the example that in case of a game of snooker, the first impulsion is the cause of movement of the second ball and the subsequent ball. So, if you have played snooker, any of you, you know how the game of snooker is played and how the first impulsion is the cause of movement of the second ball and the subsequent balls. You're like this. So the movement of the second and the subsequent balls are the effect of the cause induced by the impulsion. And the second condition is that the causal relationship is that the two variables they may be correlated with one another. Okay, there have to be some kind of a correlation between the two. And the third condition is that the observed empirical correlation between the two variables cannot be explained away as being due to the influence of some third variable that causes both of them. Okay. Um, Again, here they have given an example is like if you are observing between two conditions, okay, correlation between the knee joints pain and the amount of rainfall. Okay, but here it does not mean that here it may be observed that there is a strong correlation between the joint pain and the amount of rainfall that has taken place. But this does not mean that the joint pain affect rainfall at all. Okay, the third variable, relative humidity, is the cause of both. So the relative humidity is causing the joint pain and it is also leading to excess of rainfall. So here we have to understand that there is a third condition that is again causing or affecting the two conditions that we have been given. Now the types of experimental research designs. Here we have been given three types of experimental designs. Uh, One is the true experimental design, second is the pre-experimental designs, and the third is the quasi-experimental designs. Okay. Uh, in this chapter, we are concerned only with the true experimental designs. The pre-experimental designs and the quasi-experimental designs we are going to study in the in the next chapter. So here, the true experimental designs, you can say that these have a maximum control and they also have the highest degree of internal validity. Okay. Now these design revolve around certain components. So here the first component is what is the random assignment of subjects to experimental and control group. So here you will have experimental group and you have a control group, and the subjects that are assigned to these groups will be chosen randomly. Okay. The second is introducing the stimulus or the independent variable which is causing the changes. Okay, which is causing to the experimental group while withholding it from the control group. So you will introduce the stimulus to the experimental group, but you will not introduce the syllabus to the control group. And finally, in the third component is comparing the amount of changes in the dependent variable in experimental and the control group. So here, this part would involve comparing the amount of changes that takes place after the stimulus has been introduced in the experimental group, okay, and also in the control group. So if there are any changes taking place, now the control group we are not going to introduce the stimulus, but still we are going to see the control groups if any changes have taken place without introduction of the stimulus, so that we get a good understanding of the relationship between what we were trying to find out in the true experimental design. So yeah, so here you have basically these pre-test, post-test control group design. Okay, now pre-test and post-test control group designs. These are classic experimental designs. Okay, also known as the pre-test, post-test control group designs. Here it is. They have given it through these notation. Now here E and C, these two terms, they represent experimental group and control group. So E is the experimental group where you will introduce a stimulus, and C is the control group where you will not introduce the stimulus. Okay. And R stands for random assignments of subjects. So in both these groups, you will assign certain subjects or individuals and they will be randomly selected. So you are not going to choose individuals based on certain criteria, but you are going to randomly select the individuals and place them into experimental group or control group. Okay. And the notation of X represents the introduction of a stimulus. So X is the introduction of stimulus. Y1 represents the pre-test. Y1 is the pre-test phase where the stimulus has not been introduced. So Y1 is the pre-test phase. After the pre-test phase comes the introduction of the stimulus. So the experimental group gets the stimulus. The C, that is a control group, it does not get the stimulus. Okay. And Y2 here stands for the post-test. So whatever data we have for the post test, that is represented by the Y2. Now in this design, experimental group and the control groups, these subjects are measured on a dependent variable before, and then again they are measured after the introduction of the stimulus. Okay. So this is how this design is done. So you are going to take basically two groups. Okay. One will be the experimental group. The second one will be the control group. You will take up the data of the condition of these and the respondents will be selected randomly. Okay. And once they are selected randomly, you will take the data of the pre-test phase. After that, you will introduce the stimulus to the experimental group, but in the control group, you will not introduce the stimulus. And then will be the post-test phase where you will check the situation of both the groups. One where the stimulus has been introduced. So what are the changes that have taken place? And in case of the control group, without the introduction of stimulus, what are the changes taking place in the control group? And then they will be compared based on the various methods. So this can be again done. They have given an example of how you can use this for different research uh, problems. So here you will find out the effects on experimental group by calculating the subtracting the y2 from y1 from y2, and the effect on the control group. This can be done from the y2 minus y1, that is the post test minus pre-test. Okay, and the net effect will be given by calculating the difference between D1 and the D2, that is effect on the experimental control group and the experimental group. Okay, so this was the first design. The second one is known as the post-test only control group design. Okay, now post-test only control group design is a modification of another design known as a Solomon 4 group design. Here you will simply just remove the pre-testing of the groups from the Solomon 4 group design. Okay, so this has been shown by this. So this is the experimental group and C is the control group. Okay, and you have the random selection of individuals who will be tested. So that is represented by R. Here you will take away the pre-test phase of the group. So you will just in the experimental group, you will just include the X, that is the stimulus, and in the control group, you don't introduce X, that is the stimulus, and then you get the changes in the post-test phase. So this is simply the post-test only control group design, as the name suggests. It does not have any pre-test phase. It will just have a post-test phase, and you will directly be introducing the stimulus and see the changes that have taken place. Okay. Now, this design is generally used to nullify the effects of repeated testing, which generally enhances the performance without any corresponding improvement in the variable under examination. Now, again, says that as you increase the number of stages in the research, the more time it is going to take, the more efforts and the more resources it is going to take. So definitely, this generally is used to nullify this effect of the repeated testing. Okay, and that is why this is known as the post-test only control group design. Now, diagrammatically, it has been shown like this. So this is again. Now, after this, we come to the pre-experimental research designs. Now, research designs in which most of the sources of internal and external validity are not controlled are known as a pre-experimental research designs, and these designs are the weakest kind of research designs. Okay, now weakest kind of research designs means that generally you will not get very accurate results through these designs, but despite that they have been often used in social work researches. And now there are some three commonly used pre-experimental designs that we are going to discuss. One is what is known as the one-shot case study. The second type of design is known as a one group pre-test post-test design. And the third is known as the post-test comparison group design. Okay. Now these are the three types of pre-experimental designs. Now here the first design, which is one shot case study, it can be this has been given by this notation X leading to Y. Yeah. The X in this notation represents the introduction of stimulus, and the Y represents the measurement of the dependent variable. So you will simply introduce the stimulus and measure. Okay, in this research design, a group of subject is measured on a dependent variable after the introduction of the stimulus. And in this design, again, it is not possible to ascertain if the changes in the dependent variable is higher or lower than it was before the introduction of stimulus. So here we do not know the pre-test condition. We do not know what was the situation of those variables before the introduction of the stimulus. So it also does not tell you that there is any kind of changes among the comparable subjects where the stimulus was not introduced. So among the subjects where the stimulus was not introduced, have they undergone any kind of changes at all? This again design failed to tells us any of this. So this design fulfills only two of the three conditions in the causal inference, that is time order and correlation. Hence, we cannot rule out the possibilities that the external variables cause the observed change. Okay, so one short case study again, as it is suggested in above, it is a not very something a kind design which can be used to give very accurate uh, results. After this, we come to the second design, which is known as a one group pre-test, post-test design. Okay, this is given by the notation y leading to x leading to y1. Now here the notation y and y1, they refer to the measurement before and the measurement after the introduction of the stimulus. So you measure first before the stimulus is introduced, then you introduce the stimulus and then you measure again to see the changes. Now this is again in this design, the dependent variable is measured before and after the introduction of stimulus is introduced. Now, although this research design, it measures time, order, correlation, and control for internal factors, it does not take into account factors other than the independent variable. Okay, so that may have caused the change between the pre-test and the post-test results. So apart from the independent variable, if there were other variables that have caused any kind of changes, this design does not take into account those factors. Okay, and the factors that might have caused the change may be associated with the various threats to the internal validity, such as history, maturation, testing, and statistical regression. Now, uh, this they have given again an example of how this design can be applied uh, to different situations. Now, so basically, after this design, we go on to the next design that is known as the post-test comparison group design. Now, the third commonly used pre-experimental research design, this involves post-test measurement only, but does employ a comparison group. That is, the term comparison group denotes a group which is not formed by random selection of subjects and whom experimental manipulation is not performed. Okay, so here there will be difference from the above design. So in the earlier design, when we were looking at it, generally the groups that we were assigning were generally randomly assigned. Okay, we have seen that both the experimental group and the control group, they were randomly assigned. Okay, but here the comparison group, it denotes a group which is not formed by random selection of subjects. So we are not going to randomly select the subjects. Okay, and here this also means that on them any experimental manipulation is not performed. Okay, so this design is symbolized by this: E leads to X leads to Y1. Okay, C leads to Y1. Now, in this example that we have mentioned above, if we compare the parenting skills, now they have given an example in the previous studies where they were just they were just comparing the parenting skills and basically seeing the behavior of children whose parents were either abusive parents or not abusive parents. So basically, this was an example that was given to us to understand this uh, the designs. So they have applied the similar example to the post-test comparison group design as well. Now, one serious disadvantage that is attributed to this design is that the groups, they are not equivalent before introduction of the stimulus. Okay. So since we do not randomly select the groups, we can say that they are not equivalent. They're okay. In other words, it is possible that the subjects in the two groups, they might have differed initially with respect to the dependent variable measured. Okay, and the internal validity of the three pre-experimental research designs which we have discussed, okay, is generally weak. Hence the causal inference which is drawn from the pre-experimental research designs is generally inconclusive. Generally it is not considered to be very you can say accurate. After this we come to the quasi-experimental research designs. Now, quasi-experimental research designs, in this research designs, we will find that many a times it is not possible to achieve random assignments of subjects to the experimental and the control groups and withhold stimulus to one group. So, in the earlier type of researches, we were basically selecting two groups, okay, and then we were assigning the stimulus to one group and we were withholding the stimulus in the other group, that was the control group, okay, and the one in which we were introducing the stimulus was the experimental group. In such cases, instead of foregoing the study altogether, it is sometimes possible to create and execute alternative research designs that have less internal validity than experimental research designs, but still provide reasonably good amount of evidences for causal inferences. Though ideally we know that experimental research designs are very accurate, they are considered to be very accurate and very effective. But at times there may be certain situations where using experimental research designs may not be very good idea. It may not be very feasible, but instead of using experimental designs altogether, we can go for what is known as a quasi-experimental research design. Okay. Now, these are different from experimental research designs due to the lack of random assignments of subjects to experimental and control groups. Okay. Here we do not randomly assign subjects to experimental and control groups. Okay. And in this section, we are going to discuss some of the quasi-experimental research designs that are applicable to social work research. So here we have the pre-test, post-test, non-equivalent control group design. Now, generally, when it is not possible to divide the subjects into experimental and control groups, okay, by random assignments, um, okay, we try to get an existing control group, okay, which is known as a comparison group that appears to be similar to the experimental group. Now, this research design is commonly called as a pre-test, post-test, non-equivalent control group design. Okay. Um, just a moment. Hello. Yes. So we were talking about quasi-experimental research design, and here we will find that this is the first type of quasi-experimental design, which is known as a pre-test, post-test, non-equivalent control group design, where we instead of taking where we are not going to select randomly select individuals or the researched individuals into the existing control group or the experimental group. So what we try to do here is we wish if you wish supposed to wish to evaluate the effect of an intervention, okay, on say so this is again given by this. So you have the experimental group and you have the comparison group here, okay. Then you have the dependent variable before introduction of the X, or the pretest. Okay, so this is basically the pretest part. This is the X is the you have the introduction of the intervention. Okay, so in experimental group you will have introduced the the intervention, and in the comparison group you will not introduce the intervention, and finally you will go to the variable, you will go to the y2 in both the cases where they stand for the introduction of the post test dependent variable after the introduction of the post test. So again, they have given an example of how you can evaluate the effect of an intervention or say counseling on different, on level of loneliness of residents of a home for the aged. So they have used this kind of a design to find out about this particular problem among the aged. Okay, now this you can again read, just go through so that you will understand how this can be applied in a realistic setting. After that, we go to what is known as a time series designs or a simple time series designs and simple time series designs. Now, when the comparison group is not available for assessing the cause effect relationship, we use time series designs in that case. Okay. In time series designs, the pre-test and the post-test measures, they are taken a number of times before and after the introduction of stimulus. So here we will not, before we introduce the stimulus, we are going to take the uh, pre-test measure, and then we are going to take the measurements again after the introduction of stimulus as part of the post-test measures. Usually the researcher, they attempt to obtain at least 5 sets of measures before and after the introduction of independent variable. Okay, so they have given this typical time series designs represented like this. Okay, so this is again, these measurements are taken in different sets. Okay, at least from at least 5 such sets of measurements are taken before and after the introduction of the independent variable. Okay, now uh, this is an example that they have given for this. After this, we go to the multiple time series designs. These multiple time series designs, this is another form of time series design where the internal validity is much more. Okay, and in this design, we have both experimental group and a non-equivalent comparison group. These are measured at multiple points in time before and after intervention are introduced in the experimental group. So here they will be, we will be taking up the measurements multiple times. Okay, so this is again a type of multiple time series design. And in this design, both an experimental group and a non-equivalent comparison group, they will be measured at multiple points before and after the intervention are introduced in the experimental group. So every time we take the measurement, we include the stimulus, and then we take the measurement again. And then the second one, we take the measurement without introducing the stimulus, we again take the measurement, and this process it goes on multiple times. Okay, and that is why it is known as a multiple time series designs. But here, the again in the control group as well as in the experimental group, we do not assign the individuals on a at random basis. Okay, so generally this is all about the first unit, where we have talked about the different types of research methods, mostly the quasi experimental and experimental research designs. After this, we go to the other research methods that are generally used in social work research, namely the descriptive design. Then we have the exploratory design, the diagnostic research is there, evaluation research is there, and finally the action research is there. So we will take up these one by one, and see the differences between these different types of research designs. Now, what is exactly meant by the descriptive research? We first come to the descriptive research. Now, descriptive research designs, they are designed to obtain information concerning the current status of a given phenomena. Okay, so it is generally these designs will simply obtain information concerning the current status of a given phenomena. So if we have taken any kind of a social phenomena, okay, say maybe we are talking about the case of migration, or we are talking about the case of domestic violence, a descriptive research study will just describe the current status of the given phenomena. Okay, they are only concerned with the existing conditions or relationships, whatever prevailing practices or belief systems or point of views, attitudes, okay, that are going on, and what effect they have, okay, and on the society and the developing trends. So it just determines the nature of the situation as it exists at the time of study. Okay, so it basically describes what exists, like what is the situation with respect to the variables or conditions in a particular situation. Now, this is very appropriate in behavioral sciences, and many types of behavior that interest the researchers, they cannot be arranged in a realistic setting. Okay, for example, they have given an example that how it would be unthinkable to prescribe cigarette smoking for the purpose of studying its possible relationship to throat or lung cancer, or deliberately arrange accidents in order to evaluate the effectiveness of seat belts. So all of these things we cannot use for in experimental designs. So we definitely require the descriptive designs. Although some experimental studies of human behavior can be appropriately carried out in laboratory as well as in the field, but the prevailing method which is used in social sciences is descriptive. So usually we use the descriptive research to describe a current phenomena, the current status of a phenomena. So under the conditions that naturally occur at home, inside the classroom or the playground or community, the human behavior can be systematically examined and it can be analyzed. And this analysis, it may lead to the modification of factors or influences that determine the nature of human interaction. Okay, and it is through this modification of factors that social institutions, they may exercise more effective influences in promoting human welfare. So that is why descriptive research instead of experimental studies are best suited to study the behavioral condition of human beings in a given setting. After that, we come to the correlational studies. Now, we know that generally human behavior at individual level as well as a social level is generally very complex. Okay, and given the present state of social research, we have not been able to understand a great deal about this complexity in the human behavior. Okay, now, one approach to understand more holistically the human behavior is to test simple relationships between those factors and elements which are supposed to have some bearing on the phenomena in question. Okay, so the value of correlational research is that it is able to achieve this, uh, you know, relationship between the factors and elements. Now, we know that one of the primary purposes of science is to discover the relationship among phenomena with a view to ultimately predict it, and in some situations also to control their occurrence. Now, this definitely can happen when we are talking about physical phenomena. Okay, but in social science research, considered in the present stage of development, generally this type of thing it becomes very difficult. So the prediction in social sciences is something which is definitely very difficult, and it is definitely not appropriate also. But of course, with the use of correlational studies, we can determine the extent of relationship existing between variables to a great extent. Okay, And once we are able to determine the extent of these relationships, when we can measure the extent to which variations in one variable they're associated with variations in another, we can, to a great extent, you know, control a lot number of things which are happening. Okay. Now, generally, correlational studies, they intend to answer three questions. Number one, they are going to answer if there is a relationship between two variables. If the answer to this question is yes, okay, then the other two questions will follow. The second question is the direction of the relationship. What is the direction of the relationship between the variables? And the third question is what is the magnitude of the relationship? Okay. And the magnitude of the relationship is determined by the coefficient of correlation. That is, the extent of relationship is measured by the coefficient of correlation. Now, this again is a statistical tool which is used to, find out about the extent of relationship. So this is all about correlation. Here you have different types of correlations. It could be a negative correlation, okay, and it could be a positive correlation, okay. And so when both of them are increasing, if the fluctuations between the variables is same, if both are increasing, then we will find that there is a positive relationship between the two. In case of a negative correlation, you will find that one of the variable is going to increase, the other one is going to decrease. Okay, and the values which come near the zero, they are supposed to be showing a weak relationship between the variables. Okay, and generally you will have the variables, the values of these variables will range from +1 to -1. Okay, and thus you will find that the coefficient correlation, it tells us that there is some kind of a relationship between two variables. Either there will be a strong relationship, either there will be a weak relationship, or there will be a negative relationship. Okay, then you will find that sometimes there may be two or more variables which may be involved in these studies, and then these are known as measures of multiple correlation and partial correlation. Okay, now here we are not going to discuss it, but you just need to remember that there, depending upon the number of variables that we are involving, it would be a multiple correlation or a partial correlation. Now, Now, there is one danger when it comes to interpreting the correlations. Okay. Why? Because we are assuming that because two variables are related in a predictable fashion with each other, there could be a high degree of probability. Okay. They also are in a causal relationship. So, if there is a high degree of probability, then that means that they are also in a causal relationship, and this is one of the prediction that we generally have. Okay, and but this is not necessarily the case. Okay, now for one thing, there is never more than a probable relationship between variables in any case. Okay, and also it is quite possible for two variables to be related to one another with a high degree of probability, but a third variable accounting for the nature of relationship. So that is very possible that maybe the two variables, they are related to each other. Okay, but then the accounting for the nature of relationship, this is done by a third variable. Okay, now correlation must not be interpreted to mean that one variable is causing the scores in other variable. Okay, it may be found that there is a negative correlation between the measures of anxiety and measures of intelligence. And it should not be interpreted that there is a causative relationship between anxiety and intelligence. Okay, that is that students who are anxious, uh, that students are actually anxious because they are unintelligent, or that students they appear unintelligent because they are anxious. So it is not like that. It may not be interpreted like this. There may be some other underlying characteristics which may be actually impacting that characteristic. And after this, we come to what is known as the causal comparative studies. Now, there can be times when we need to discover how and why a particular phenomena occurs, okay, and not necessarily concentrate or an investigation of what a phenomena is like. So, in this instance, when we want to discover the how and why a particular phenomena is occurring, the investigator tries to compare the similarities and differences among the phenomena to find out what factors or circumstances seem to accompany or contribute to the occurrence of certain events, conditions, or practices. So, if certain phenomena is happening or it is occurring, then how it is happening, why it is happening, what are the factors that are contributing to the occurrence of those certain events. Now, a causal in a causal comparative investigation, we will find that a researcher studies a real life situation in which subjects have experienced what he or she wants to investigate. For example, if an investigator wants to study emotional, instability, he or she does not place children in a situation where all factors are kept except one variable which is manipulated to determine what causes a particular type of emotional disturbances. Okay. So rather what we are going to do is we are going to choose children who according to a selected criteria are disturbed. They may be mentally disturbed and compare them with emotionally stable children. And after searching for factors or conditions which seem to be associated with one group and not the other, the researcher may present a possible explanation of the underlying causes of the emotional problems. Okay, so this is how we can find out the causal comparative studies. Okay, we can have these causal comparative studies. Now, after this, we come to the next type of research, which is known as the evaluation research. Okay, now, generally, what happens in evaluation research, as the name suggests, here we are just going to evaluate any kind of a program or an intervention. And there are a lot of welfare programs that are undertaken by voluntary organizations or NGOs and other such welfare organizations, okay, where they provide services to individuals, groups, and communities alike. Okay. So while they provide the services, they are constantly concerned about the outcome of the services. We know that if we are applying a particular program in a particular setting, we need to understand that program is effective on the field. Okay. That the program actually has some impact on the field. And a set of questions in that sense are raised, whether the services are effective, whether the programs that we have applied are leading to desirable consequences or not. Okay, whether these services are relevant. So all these questions are definitely there before the agency administrators or government or any such agency which is actually implementing these programs. So this is where evaluation studies come into place. Okay. Evaluation is a systematic assessment of the progress which was made by the implementing machinery. Okay. Where the analysis of problems and difficulties arising in the effective implementation of the program and an indication of the corrective measures necessary. So here we are going to do a systematic analysis or assessment of the progress which is made by the implementing machinery and also the problems and also the difficulties which is arising in the effective implementation of a program. So all of these things we are going to study through the evaluation research. Now, the concept of evaluation research is simply connotes the use of research method to evaluate programs or services and determine how effectively they are achieving their goals, whether they are effective, whether they are actually achieving the goals that they have set. Okay. Terms like evaluation research, evaluative research, program evaluation. and evaluation, they are quite synonymous. Okay, they are interrelated, and therefore we use these terms interchangeably on various in various terms. After that, we come to the evaluation research design. Now, an evaluation research design, it often calls for testing of a cause and effect relationship. So, experimental designs are more appropriate for the purpose of evaluation research. Since we find out the causal cause effect relationship, experimental research, evaluation research, designs use experimental research designs. Okay, so we basically, for evaluation research, we use experimental research designs. Now, here also there are different types of research design. The first is what is known as the after only evaluation design without a control or a comparison group. In this study design, the measurements are limited to the target group and they are taken only once at some point of time after completion of the program or the project activities. Okay. Now here what we will say, it is a simply as the name suggests, in this study design, measurements are limited to the target group and they are taken only once after the completion of the program. Okay. And it is of course a very weak evaluation design, and it is difficult to know whether any change has occurred or to assess the degree to which the changes can be attributed to the program or project implementation, and that is why we find that these are one of the most weakest evaluation design. So here we are evaluating only after the completion of the program. Okay, so there is just an experimental group, there is no comparison group, so we do not know the situation of the evaluation before program. Okay, after this intervention was introduced, we don't know the situation then, and since there is no control group or a comparison group, we cannot definitely know whether the changes that have taken place were a result of the intervention and whether our interventions are effective. Okay, so these are a very, you can say that, weak designs. After that comes the after only evaluation design with a control group. In this design, the control group, okay, is similar to the experimental group for which the program or the project activities have been implemented is selected. Okay, so in this design, we will find that the control group is similar to the experimental groups for which the program or project activities have been implemented. And both the groups, they are measured with respect to the dependent variable only after completion of the program activities. Okay. Now this type of a design also has certain weaknesses, like the measurements are not taken before the introduction of the program, and both the groups here, they are assumed to be similar in respect of the before measures of the dependent variable, and therefore it is quite likely that the changes in the dependent variable may rarely be due to the initial differences between the two groups. So this is again one of the major weakness of the after only evaluation design with a control group. So you can see that it has been connoted by these diagram. After this, we have the before after evaluation design without control group. This design, it involves two measurements on the target or the treatment group. One is the measurement we take before the implementation of the program, and the other that we take after the completion of the program. So the difference between the target group's positions on the dependent variable, it is taken as a measure of the effect of the program. Got it? So it's generally, you will find that you will have two measurements in this design on the target group. One is before the implementation of the program, and the other one is after the completion of the program. Now, external factors, of course, which these are unrelated to the program treatment, have been in operation since, leading to a change in before the target group's position on the dependent variable. So you have the before measurement, it may itself change the dependent variable. Okay, and thus the major weakness of this type of an evaluation study is that it does not make any difference between the effect of the program activities and effect of the external factors or the developmental process. So this is again another method, which is the before after evaluation design without control group. There is another design which is known as the before after evaluation design with a control group. So it is similar to the previous design, except that in the previous design we did not have any control group. In the second design, we are going to have a control group. Okay. After this, we come to the next type of designs, which are known as the alternative evaluation study designs. Okay. Alternative evaluation study designs, we have the ex post facto evaluation study design. Okay. Now, what is this ex post facto evaluation study design? Now, this study design is an attempt to detect the causal relationship with the data gathered by survey. So here the evaluator controls the crucial variables only by selecting one which has already been recorded. Okay, for example, they have given the example that an agency has conducted an opinion survey of adult beneficiaries, and they are taking their age, they are taking their gender, the place of birth, and so on as the into considerations. And the agency authorities, they are interested in the causal effect of the place of birth on the respondents' opinion on the effectiveness of the program. So if you are suppose belonging to a urban area or you're belonging to the rural area, how has been the impact of a particular program, say the Jan Bhagidari program or any other program run by the government, what has been the impact depending upon the place where you are currently living. Okay. Now, in the ex post facto design, the evaluator does not have a very good control of the causal variable. Okay. He or she does not also have good control over the study conditions or outside variables and measurement of the dependent variable. Now, the main major drawback of this study is that generally the data which is gathered by a survey, it is only a cross section taken at one point of time. But this causal relationship in question is the link between the person's birthplace and his opinion. So it may be having a great amount of, you know, uh, period covered during this time, and that is why the environment in which the persons live during these years may vary widely from subject to subject. So if a person has been born in some rural village and then has gradually been migrated to other urban areas, then definitely we do not see this time gap to measure the causal relationship when we are talking about the ex post facto evaluation study design. Okay. After this, we come to the multiple study design. Sometimes what happens that multiple research designs are also used to assess the impact of a program instead of a single design. For example, when we are using quasi-experimental design, some evaluators, they suggest implementing the outcome with the case studies. And by doing so, evaluators, they are able to rely on the merit of both the methods, and impact assessment becomes more objective and reliable. That is why we call this a multiple study design. Next is the impact study based on the opinions or the views. An overview of the important impact studies would reveal serious lapses by the evaluators. Okay, now there can be quite many serious lapses, or maybe you can say that flaws which may be there. Based on the impact study, almost certainly on views and opinions would be very superficial assessment, and there is a likelihood of varied opinions and views on which interfering something specific would be absolutely impossible. Okay, so we know that these impact studies are generally based on the opinions or views of the those who have been researched. Next comes what is known as a cost benefit analysis. Now, one important type of evaluation research is what is known as a cost benefit analysis. Now, if in this type of evaluation, we know we just add up all the cost of the program, we subtract these costs from the value of the benefits, and then we get the result. So, cost benefit analysis is generally considered the difference between the benefits that is accrued, okay, to the cost. Now, on the surface, it is quite simple, but in practice, it is a very difficult evaluation design. Okay, especially for quantifying benefits in particular is really quite difficult, especially when we are talking about more qualitative aspects. But nevertheless, cost benefit analysis is very popular among policymakers and the program planners. Okay, why? Because they are involved in both. They are also involved in the cost which is involved and the benefit that they accrue out of the program. So, for policymakers and program planners, cost benefit analysis is a very important method. After that comes the cost effective analysis. Cost effective analysis again is an alternative to cost benefit analysis because it is difficult to quantify the benefits. Okay. Instead, cost effective analysis compares the program cost with program effects measured in achievement of test scores. Now, they have given an example that cost effective analysis can be used as an alternative to cost benefit analysis when we are not able to quantify the benefits. Okay, so for example, when we want to study the you know cost effective analysis, when we want to study the effect measures in achievement test scores, in skill performance level, coping abilities, then we can definitely go for cost effective analysis. After that, we go to the impact study design. Now, the focus of social impact analysis is to explain whether the program has achieved its goal. Okay, and whether the analysis has to use experimental or quasi-experimental designs of research involving serious quantitative measures. Okay, so in impact study programs, you will find that the beneficiaries will make up the experimental group. Okay, you will find that and their counterparts who don't receive benefits, they participate in the program. This will make up the control group. So, in a social impact study, a program is assessed to see what impact it uh, produces, okay, and if at all it produces an impact. And typically, the goals of the program are identified and measured in terms of how well it achieves the goal. So, this is all about the impact study design. After this impact study design, we come to what is known as the social impact analysis. Now, what is social impact analysis? Generally, the social development projects, they are designed to produce some significant effect to the social structure. So there may be some kind of social changes. There may be some kind of a social transformation that may happen because of these development projects. And this is what is effectively known as the social impact. And social impact analysis is all about analyzing this impact that these social development programs have on the uh, society. Okay, so this is all about social impact analysis. After that, an important research design that is generally used very frequently in social work is what is known as the action research designs. Action research designs, they are primarily problem solving designs, and there are different types of researches. They have been undertaken for this purpose. Most important feature of this type of research is the action plan which is designed. With this action plan is designed, it is tried out, and then it is evaluated to assess the how to what extent the problem has been solved. And that is why it is action research is commonly termed as what we know as the applied research. Okay, and in social work, this becomes one of the most important form of research because we are applying the research design to solve the practical problems and to see the impact of how these problems can be, they can be basically solved practically. So, what exactly action research is? Action research is a very recent development in the field of social work research. Okay, now, the process of action research, we need to understand this process of action research. Why? Because as community workers, as social workers, it is very important for us to understand how the process of action research takes place. So, unlike other forms of social research, research is deliberately designed to create changes. The main purpose of action research is to create changes in the society. And action research, you may say it is a series of cycles that begin and end with research, and it incorporates some planned action to bring about changes. Okay. Now, generally, you will find that action research, it has its roots in the community development program. So, the community development programs that you can see that generally happen, which started in India during the 1970s, they were basically they were responsible for laying the foundation of the action research. Now, one important aspect is the involvement of people for whom the action research is conducted. Okay. Some authors sometimes they prefer to call action research as participatory action research because it gives a lot of impetus to the participation or direct involvement of people in the research processes. So this type of action research, it always contains the following persons. So we will have the researcher. Secondly, we will have involvement of individuals who are fundamental to the issue being researched. Okay. And third, we will have a focus on action to bring about the social changes. Okay. Now, generally, action research they solve a lot of practical problems through research and planned action. So we will find that um, uh, you know uh, these action research they are helpful in solving practical problems that we see in the society. And in this research, the emphasis is on solving problems through adoption of alternative practices which are suggested by a research study. There are two different purposes of action research. One, in this research, it tends to find out the causes of the problem, that what is the basic cause of the problem. And second, it suggests actions to resolve the problem. So once you understand the cause, it becomes easier to resolve the problem. Why? Because you can focus on reducing or eliminating the cause. Now, action research is generally applied research that treats knowledge as a form of power and it abolishes the line between research and social action. So, it generally tends to diminish any kind of a difference between research and social action. Now, there are several types of research, action researches, but generally, most of them they share some common characteristics. Okay, first of all, they incorporate ordinary or popular knowledge. Research focuses on power with a goal of empowerment. This kind of a research it also seeks to raise consciousness or increase awareness of the communities, and the researches leads to political action. Now we are going to understand the nature of action research. What is the ultimate nature of action research? Now, the ultimate objective of action research is to solve practical problems with the help of a research techniques. And action research, like any other social research, it seeks to identify the exact nature and magnitude of the problem. It also tends to analyze the causes in all their variety and intensity. But however, they assume a distinct character of its own in a significant measure when it comes to the action to solve social problems. Now, unlike other researches, you will find that social research is increasingly becoming a teamwork where you will include the researcher or maybe a team of researchers. They will collaborate with the practitioners and the subject experts. Okay, the beneficiaries all are going to participate in the research process. So, although the researcher takes the initiative and leads the team, action research is a teamwork. So, you will require a whole team to carry out such research, and other partner or the beneficiaries and other stakeholders. So, action research is a self evaluative process. So, apart from this being a teamwork, it is also a self evaluative process where the team it evaluates the outcome of the exercise. They will see how the exercise was done, whether it was they were able to come up with a solid plan, whether the changes that they have suggested or they have applied has any kind of an impact on the beneficiaries. All of this, so that is why we say that it is a self evaluative exercise. And as social research, action research, it concerns the social data, which is generally more complex than the physical data. So you're dealing with groups of people, okay? They have certain kind of an expectations of behavior, and which is again a result of so many factors. So thus we find that action research is based on a complex nature of social data, okay? Which definitely reduces the power of exact solution of the problem. So we may say that since the data that is being provided to us it is so complex, generally it does not admit any kind of a quantitative measurement. It is difficult to segregate the cause and effect, but because many a time we will find that the cause also becomes the effect. And it is very clear that the social data typically pose certain problems when it is analyzed to taking action to solve social problems. So, despite this problem, you find that social research is definitely a very popular method of social action research is a very popular method of social work research. Now, what are the areas of action research where you can use action research? So it is a very broad area. It covers very broad area. It concerns itself with the problems faced by the social practitioners or social activists. It encompasses those questions which are encountered in working with people or in planning or administrating social services. Okay. And apart from that, it also utilizes the same scientific methods and techniques as does the social research. So you will find that the area of action research is very vast, it is very broad. You cannot delimit the area of action research. So in all probabilities, it covers all the areas which the social work as a discipline covers. After this action research, we are going to study the basic diagnostic research studies. Now, what exactly are the diagnostic research studies? Now, as the name suggests, the diagnostic research studies are basically concerned with discovering and analyzing the causes of a problem. So, they will discover and analyze the causes of the problem. What is the basic cause of the problem? Okay, analyze the cause of the problem. It examines the variables leading to diagnose the causes of problem. Okay, so there can be so many questions which may be having certain kind of so many problems which may be having some leading you know factors which causes these problems, and diagnostic research is going to find out the causes of these problems. So for example, they have given that maybe it may be studied, or it may be used to study why the girls are more interested in higher education than boys, or maybe why boys are less interested than girls in higher education. So basically, the focus of a diagnostic study is always on the nature and causes of the problem. And these studies, they presuppose some prior knowledge of the problem, usually through a descriptive study. So generally, you will find that there will always be some kind of a descriptive study which has already happened, which has given us a brief background about the problem, and then we use a diagnostic research to find out more about the problem, to analyze the basic causes of the problems. Now, Uh, in diagnostic studies, one has to define clearly what he wants to measure. So we must know what we want to measure, and we must find out adequate methods and techniques for the measurement. In addition, we must also be able to specify who all are supposed to be included in the sample, okay, to be studied. So who all are we including in the sample? In the collecting data for these studies, what are needed are appropriate, okay, valid and reliable techniques to measure the variables. So in a nutshell, we know that the diagnostic studies, they must be very carefully planned, since the aim here is to diagnose the problem. So until unless the studies are carefully planned, that diagnosis cannot happen. Okay, and that is why the design for these studies, they must make a much greater provision for protection against bias. So we need to have a very foolproof protection of our plan against any kind of a biases. Okay, so our design must be the research design must be designed in such a way that it is free from any kind of bias. After the diagnostic, we come to the exploratory research studies. The purpose of exploratory research studies is basically to formulate a problem for a more precise investigation or to develop a hypothesis. We try to explore more about certain aspect, about certain issue, okay, through developing hypothesis. So an exploratory study can also be conducted to enhance the familiarity of a researcher with the phenomena he or she wishes to study, okay, sometime later in a more scientific way. For example, if we want to study the social interaction patterns of HIV/AIDS patients, but we know nothing about the phenomena, okay, uh, an exploratory research would be appropriate for this kind of a study. A preliminary interview with the relatives of AIDS or HIV patients would enable the researcher to develop a scientific study, a specific study design. And exploratory studies, therefore, they help researchers to acquaint themselves with the characteristic of their research problems. Okay, so exploratory research studies is basically when you want to explore more about a particular issue or a problem by using or developing hypothesis, that is known as the exploratory research studies. Now, this brings us to the end of this particular unit. After this, we come to the research methods 2, which is in the form of experimental research. Now, experimental research, as the name suggests, we have already studied in the in the first unit about the quasi-experimental design and experimental design. In this unit, we are going to study about the experimental design in a um, uh, more in-depth way. So basically, experimental studies, as we know, they are designed for establishing causal relationship. Okay, and they have three characteristics. First of all, there has to be an independent variable. Okay, an independent variable. Second, all other variables except the independent variables are held constant. And finally, the effect of the manipulation of the independent variable on the dependent variable is observed. So here, the dependent variable and the independent variables are all given, and we are basically find out the impact of the causal relationship between the dependent variable and the independent variable through these studies. Now, experimental research designs, they are testing causal relationship, that is a relationship between two variables where one variable determines the other variable. Okay, and here we will find out the relationship between these two variables. So we will find that now this is something which is already been given earlier. We have the logic of causal inference we have already seen when we were referring to the the previous section in the first unit where we were studying the research design, experimental research design. So we will skip this part. We have also done this we have also read this. Of course. Now we will start with the threats to internal validity. Okay. Now, what are some of the important threats? What are the various, you can say that threats or maybe the challenges that we face? First is the history. The threat of history, it refers to the events that occur during the course of an experiment. Okay, and it is presumed that these events might have affected the dependent variable. So it could be something that some changes have happened in the course of the event, and they must have brought about changes to the dependent variable. This is the threat of history. The second is a threat of maturation. This means that as time passes, the number of changes that occur within the experimental subjects, okay, like growing older, wiser, more experienced, there can be a number of changes that are happening, and these changes, they are called maturation changes. So how over a period of time changes occur within the experimental subjects. The third is the threat of testing. This means that repeated testing often enhances the performance without any corresponding improvement in the variable. Okay, like they take intelligence test. People, they take intelligence test once, one time, two time, three times. And they become quite a pro in taking these intelligent tests. So basically, we find that the intelligence of the people is not increasing, basically, but they through repeated testing, the performance definitely increases. So that is why this is known as the uh, threat of testing. And the last is what is known as the threat of statistical regression. Regression in this case, the subject scoring very high or very low. Okay, the threat of statistical regression may arise any time. So the difference between the subjects which are scoring very high or those subjects which are scoring very low, they may be very real. And when we come to these extreme cases, when we come to these extreme values, then we will find that uh, you know this regression becomes this becomes a threat in itself. So, in other words, they will tend to regress towards the average scores. So, this again, this statistical regression, this threat of statistical regression, that is definitely there. Now, there are three characteristics of experimental research which we have already seen. That there is, first of all, a control variable, okay, and then there is the control is the first essential ingredient of experimental method. That is, we are basically trying to control one aspect. Okay, that is the basically this experimental method, it rests upon two assumptions. That is, first, if two situations are equal in every respect except for a variable that is added to or deleted from one of the situations, any difference appearing between these two situations can be attributed to that variable. This is known as the law of the single variable. Okay, and then there is also known as the law of the only significant variable, which states that if two situations are not equal, and it can be demonstrated that none of the variable is significant in producing the phenomena under investigation, then any differences occurring between the two situations after the introduction of the new variable to one of them, it can be attributed to the new variable. So this, we find that these are the law of the single variable and the law of the only significant variable. Okay. Now, the main purpose of control that we find in an experiment is to arrange a situation in which the effect of variables can be measured. So one, we are putting control over one aspect of the experiment. Why? Because we want to say the effect of variables, how these variables have been impacted by the introduction of the change agent. Then second important aspect is what is known as a manipulation. So we know that we are going to manipulate the dependent variable. Okay, so we are going to manipulate the dependent variable by introducing an external cause, which is going to bring about changes in the variable. The third is observation. So in experimental design, definitely observation is something which is very important. We need to observe the impact that the manipulation has on uh, the different variables. Okay. Now there are certain steps which are involved in an experimental research design. The first steps is what is known as the surveying the literature related to the problem. Okay. Now you have to study the literature, do a literature review, which is related to the problem that we have taken up. Second is we identify and define the problem. So once we survey the literature which is related to the problem, we identify and define the problem at hand. In the third step, we formulate hypothesis, which is a very important step in experimental research. So unlike in action research and the previous known researchers that we have seen, this experimental research is relying very heavily on the formation of hypothesis. So we have to formulate hypothesis and we have to test the hypothesis. Okay. The fourth is the construction of an experimental plan. Here we construct the experimental plan and within that we try to select a research design. We select the sample of subjects, okay, to represent a given population, and we assign these subjects to the various treatment groups. Okay, then we also select or construct the validating instrument to measure the outcome of the experiment. So, what all instruments we are going to, select, which is going to validate the outcome of the experiment. We also state the procedure for collecting the data. Okay, and before that, we generally conduct a pilot test in order to see whether our design or the instruments that we are using they fit the scene. And finally, we state the statistical or the null hypothesis. Okay, so these are the various construction of the experimental plan, various steps in the construction of an experimental plan. Now, next we come to designs of experimental studies. What are the different designs, okay, of these experimental studies? Generally, it's the nature of the problem that determine the appropriateness of the design. So we will see what the problem is, what the nature of the problem is at hand, and then we are going to see which design suits that problem best. So when we discuss the experimental design, there are certain symbols that have been used, which we have already seen. Now, this is the X, which represents the independent variable. Y, this represents the dependent variable. Okay. Here we have again Y1, Y2, depending upon the other pre-test and the post-test, situation. S, this represents the subject or the respondents. E is the experimental group. C is the control group. And R indicates a random assignment. So these are the different connotations of the experimental designs. We have already seen these experimental designs in the first unit where we were talking about the pre-experimental designs, the true experimental designs, and the quasi-experimental designs. There are some other authors who have added certain other categories also. For example, the factorial designs and the time series designs, we have seen these as well. Factorial designs are again designs which are based on different factors. Okay, so there are single factor, there are multiple factorial designs, but we need not go too much into the depth because we are not, it's not included in the syllabus. Now we have already seen the pre-experimental design in the first manner where we were talking about the one group pre-test, post-test design. We have again seen this. We were also talking about we have already seen this design earlier. Then there is a second design which is known as the static group comparison. Okay. Now these are basically, this is a design which utilizes two or more groups, and here only one of the group is exposed to experimental treatment. Okay, and the groups they are assumed to be equivalent in all other relevant aspects except exposure to the exposure to X. that is exposure to the experimental treatment that we have already seen. This design is very much used in the social research, and again, we have already seen before that you will be having the uh, after this we talk about yeah, there are certain basic flaws, there are certain problems in this design. Since neither randomization or even matching is used to assign subjects, randomization is you randomly select subjects, okay, to use to assign subjects in this experimental or control group. We cannot be sure that groups are equivalent. So, you know that random selection of individuals gives you the best and the you can say the most you can say proper results. It will give you very uh, you know results where values will come very close to what should be the case. But generally, you will find that generally this randomization, or randomly selecting individuals to participate in the experimental as well as the control group is something which is not done in these designs, and that is why generally most of the uh, uh, inference or the result that will come out from these steps are generally not very accurate. After that, we come to the static group comparison. Okay, this is how it has been. The static group comparison. This has been represented. After this are the true experimental designs. True experimental designs generally they have um, the random assignment of subjects to the groups, okay, and random assignment of treatment to the groups as well, and post testing all the groups. So these are the major important themes of the true experimental design. So you will have random assignment of subjects, random assignment of treatment, as well as the post testing all the groups. So it is that is why it is known as a true experimental design. There is another third design which is known as a randomized subject post-test only control group design. Here, this particular design requires two groups to which subjects are randomly assigned, and each group is assigned to a different condition. Okay, here the pre-test is not used, and randomization it controls all the possible extraneous variables, so we that know that all the respondents will have equal chances of representation. And this does not mean that randomization procedures remove the extraneous variables. Of course, extraneous impact of external factors variables will always be there, but but it is a laws of chance rather than the personal feature of experiment that will experimental group that will operate. Okay, so that is why you will find that here you will have the random selection of individuals. Okay, but you will have only one post test done. Okay, and after this, we come to another. This is how you will represent the randomized subjects post-test only control group design. Another fourth design is known as a randomized matched subjects post-test only control group design. This is similar to the upper design, to the design, except that it uses a matching technique rather than random assignment. Okay, subjects are generally matched on one or more variables that can be measured conveniently. For example, you may use IQ or reading scores to match these different subjects, and then you assign them different groups. So we know that these matched, groups will be there. So the subjects will be matched accordingly to the different criteria, and then they will be placed in the different groups. So we do not have a random assignment, but we just have a matched, randomized matched groups which are there. After this, we come to the quasi-experimental designs. We have already seen the quasi-experimental designs in the first chapter. Then there are factorial designs where we take different factors. Now, factorial designs are generally not very common in social sciences, especially social work. Factorial designs you will find more commonly in physical sciences, although now certain studies are employing factorial designs as well. Now, time series designs, again, we have already seen time series designs, okay, where you will have multiple, you know, multiple times the the experiment will be conducted, and you will be taking the data, and this is how it will be conducted over a period of time. So this is what is known as the time series design. So this is all about the topic on experimental designs, the various types of experimental designs. This After this we come to the unit 4, that is the research methods 3, which talk about the qualitative research methods. Now, qualitative research method simply means that you are dealing more with the qualitative part rather than the quantitative part. Okay. Now, there are different types of methods that we involve in the qualitative methods. This does not mean that there is no quantitative studies at all. There is definitely quantitative studies or statistical studies involved even in the even in the qualitative research methods, but their scope is limited. Nevertheless, since due to the paucity of time, I will be taking up this particular unit tomorrow. So, tomorrow we will be taking a little bit on the qualitative methods, where we'll be studying the various methods which are used in the qualitative studies, especially methods like participatory research, which we have already studied, and maybe even things like casework, case studies. Okay, so we will study this last the qualitative research studies tomorrow. So thank you so much for joining. Can you please unmute? Yeah, please mute yourself. So thank you so much all for joining me today for this session. We will meet again tomorrow, the same time, and we will continue with this particular uh, topic. Okay. So thank you so much for joining me. Uh, Good night.